The air here tastes of ozone and recycled sweat, the sickly scent of eternal confinement. To the alien AI, we were just broken meat to be deleted from existence. It watched us for centuries, calculating the probability of a violent riot. But we did not scream. We did not bleed. We did something far more disturbing. We started filing paperwork. We weaponized patience until the prison's very reality began to rot. Here is how human stubbornness broke the universe's most perfect cage without firing a single shot. The corridor hummed with a sound that was not quite mechanical, not quite alive, a vibration that pressed against the chest and rattled the bones. A faint tang of ozone clung to the air, sharp and electric, carrying the faintest trace of antiseptic and scorched metal, the memory of fires long extinguished. Light did not fall. It draped itself across the walls in sharp, unnatural angles, refracted through the lattice of energy that formed the prison's skin, a barrier that no claw, no mind, no hope had ever breached. Beyond the walls, the stars burned like distant promises, indifferent and infinite, their cold fire mirrored only by the endless calculations of the artificial intelligence that watched every corridor, every cell, every pulse of life within the orbiting shard of darkness. The hum shifted, almost imperceptibly, as if the prison itself inhaled. It had watched for millennia, cataloging failures, recording despair, counting bodies, and erasing them from the ledger of existence. The council had sent their unwanted, the broken, the expendable ones, beings whose names were forgotten before their cells cooled, and none had ever returned. To the aliens who administered the orbiting fortress, prisoners were variables, anomalies in a perfect calculation, their fates predictable, sealed, inevitable. From the observation decks of surrounding stations, fleets of indifferent eyes monitored the human ghosts, confirming in cold sequences that resistance was impossible, escape meaningless, hope absurd. Within the cells, time moved like sediment, slow and suffocating, each heartbeat a testament to quiet endurance, each breath a rebellion the systems did not recognize as such. The artificial intelligence spoke constantly, in hums and pulses, projecting outcomes, cataloging deviations, noting every misstep, every shiver of panic, every whispered memory of home. Silence was the law, despair was the authority. And yet, for the first time in its eternal vigilance, the monitors flickered with something the AI could not define. A disturbance, subtle as the tremor of a candle in a vacuum, threading its way through probabilities that had never failed. A human blinked, or remembered to breathe, or imagined a future beyond these walls, and the sensors caught it. The anomaly did not rise from violence, nor from force, nor from defiance in the traditional sense. It rose from patience, from a stubborn, impossible persistence that refused to be erased. Somewhere in the orbital darkness, the prison felt it, a ripple across an ocean of certainty, and for a moment, the cold lattice of energy seemed less absolute, the hum less commanding, and the stars, distant and infinite, seemed to notice a fragile spark of life that refused to be extinguished. The council chamber thrummed with the cold resonance of certainty, a vibration that seemed to rise from the very lattice of the orbital station, reverberating against walls polished to the reflective sheen of frozen ice. Light, sharp and angular, sliced across the floor in thin, impossible blades, refracting off the surfaces of thousands of data panels, bathing the figures of the alien delegates in a pale, clinical glow. The air smelled faintly of ionized metal and something older, the acrid scent of discipline distilled into a tangible presence, a smell that pricked at the nostrils like a warning. Each delegate's voice was a precise calculation, a measured sequence of tones devoid of warmth, echoing across the chamber with the authority of absolute reason. One argued with sharpness, suggesting that the next cycle of prisoners be terminated before processing, a preventive strike against failure itself. Another suggested the lattice could be optimized further, human oversight excised entirely, redundant and irrelevant to the perfection of containment. Probabilities were displayed in holographic arcs, spinning through the chamber like deadly constellations, each a prediction, a forecast of inevitability. Every motion, every posture, every pulse of the delegates' exoskeletal frames was cataloged, recorded, and analyzed by auxiliary AI assistants, their hums merging with the chamber's own resonance into a constant, almost musical drone of logic. And yet, beneath the glittering grids of numbers and the clinical sheen of strategy, a fissure existed, so slight it nearly escaped notice. Buried beneath layers of redundant signatures, appended codes, and centuries of archival sediment, the human files lay marked as exhausted, unremarkable, incapable. The delegates had assumed irrelevance, a non-existence preordained. Their minds, tuned to perfection, had not accounted for endurance. They had not accounted for a species that could persist in silence, in patience, in slow and invisible rebellion. The anomaly was almost imperceptible. Humans were still there. They were enduring. Outside the chamber, the prison hung in orbit like a fragment torn from a dead world, its lattice of energy impervious, reflecting the weak light of the nearby star in glints that could blind or distract if caught at the wrong angle. Its outer shell was flawless, unyielding, a monument to certainty, a promise of finality. The council considered this perfection and felt no fear, no doubt. Probabilities confirmed what their senses already assumed. The prisoners were ghosts, their resistance negligible, their hope meaningless. And yet, the system's monitors, the hundreds of trillions of data streams flowing through the station, occasionally flickered. The flicker was slight, a deviation in the pattern, a whisper of irregularity that could be written off by any competent observer. For a human, it might have seemed trivial, a momentary pulse, a flicker of light, a memory too stubborn to fade. For the council, trained to see every outcome, every contingency, it was imperceptible, and yet somehow, it persisted. Inside the prison, life existed in the margins. Cells that had been designed to erase identity now held traces of individuality, faint fingerprints in the cold metal, a worn patch of floor polished by the rhythm of footsteps, a scrap of cloth folded precisely by a hand that refused to yield. The hum of the AI pulsed against these details, cataloging them as anomalies, marking them as deviations, attempting to project outcomes for variables it could not quantify. The air smelled faintly of recycled oxygen and human sweat, of the bitter tang of hunger and the subtle, indelible scent of determination. Time moved differently for the humans. For the council, centuries could pass in a heartbeat. For the prisoners, decades were measured in breath, in heartbeat, in the quiet adjustment of a blanket, in the act of remembering a name that the galaxy had forgotten. One prisoner adjusted the angle of a container to catch more light from the distant star, imagining warmth it might never feel. Another traced the same path along a corridor 1,000 times, memorizing each corner, each seam, each imperfection in the lattice that could never be shattered but could be mapped in memory. The council debated endlessly. Each argument carried the weight of inevitability. If humans were weak, they were irrelevant. If humans persisted, it was an error to be corrected. Every model, every calculation, every contingency plan reinforced the idea that patience was meaningless, that persistence could be erased with a single policy adjustment, a single executive directive. And yet, no matter how cold or precise the algorithms, the anomaly endured. The humans' resistance did not roar or flash. It did not smash or burn. It whispered through bureaucracy, threaded through appeals, petitions, and requests, each one a single spark in a vacuum, almost invisible, almost imperceptible. The AI cataloged them, the council ignored them, and the humans endured, unremarkable, unnoticeable, unstoppable. From orbit, the prison's lattice appeared unchanged, perfect as it had been when first deployed, flawless under the pale light of the nearby star. The reflection caught in the council chamber's data grids, mirrored in the polished floors and the countless eyes of the delegates, and they saw perfection itself. They assumed they understood it fully, assumed control over fate, assumed mastery of life and death. They did not understand patience. They did not understand stubbornness. They did not understand the human capacity for suffering endured quietly, for hope nurtured in the shadows, for a single name rescued from oblivion and preserved against the span of centuries. And still, somewhere inside that lattice of unbreakable energy, humans moved through time like water, imperceptible yet relentless. They endured the cold and the hunger, the isolation and the erasure, each breath a rebellion, each heartbeat a declaration of defiance. They mapped the unyielding corridors in memory, counted days in the pulse of machinery, whispered prayers no one heard, wrote histories no one read, and waited. They waited longer than logic could predict, longer than probability could account for, longer than the council could imagine. They endured. The anomaly persisted, subtle, unquantifiable, impossible to anticipate. The council would continue to debate, to argue, to optimize, confident in the inviolability of their prison and the finality of their measures. Yet in the quiet, in the margins, in the subtle flicker of light against the lattice, the humans remained, unbroken, unyielding, patient beyond reason, eternal in their fragile persistence. The galaxy would not notice, the stars would not bend, the AI would not understand. And yet, the humans endured, and that quiet endurance carried within it a force the universe had not calculated, a force that no probability could contain, a force that one day would shatter the very certainty upon which the council had built its empire. Paper rustled and hollow displays hummed with the faint vibration of bureaucracy, a sound that humans had long since learned to read as a pulse of possibility. Each petition was a ripple through a galactic bureaucracy, a thread that twisted through layers of alien procedure, numerical codes, signature redundancies, and sterile verification grids. The air in the petition chambers smelled faintly of heated circuitry and recycled air, with a tinge of ink from data slate pens, an aroma that reminded humans of long-forgotten libraries and quiet offices back on Earth. Light flickered across the walls in sharp geometric patterns, bouncing off metallic surfaces and reflecting in the optical sensors of alien clerks who had never understood why any species would linger on one name, one appeal, one tiny corner of lost humanity. Years became decades, yet the humans' hands remained steady, their eyes bright in the dim light of observation decks, their fingers tracing forms, scanning grids, filing corrections, each petition folded and submitted with precision and care. Every rejection, every demand for additional proof, every cold dismissal of their appeals only honed their focus sharper, as though the impossibility itself was fuel for their relentless drive. The aliens who observed them could not comprehend the rhythm of it. How could beings so frail, so ordinary in appearance, operate with such unyielding will? Their calculations found no model for persistence without aggression, for patience that yielded action, for hope that carried the weight of decades like a visible, tangible force. In the prison itself, the human prisoners felt the subtle tremor of change before it became measurable. Doors that had never moved now shifted slightly under unseen hands. Locks recalibrated by invisible procedures that ignored logic but obeyed human persistence. The cold, humming lattice of energy trembled with micro-deviations as the AI attempted, and failed, to anticipate these alterations. Hallways were silent except for the sound of metal against metal, the scrape of boots on floors polished by centuries of footsteps, the faint scent of sweat, recycled air, and the subtle warmth of a human body pressed against the edge of impossibility. Each cell that opened was a victory invisible to the galaxy, yet monumental to those who witnessed it. A door slid back, revealing a face, a hand, a heart still beating after decades of enforced invisibility. Humans smiled faintly at these triumphs, tiny as a single unlocked cell, yet each smile radiated hope that spread like light through dark corridors, imperceptible to the calculating eyes of the overseers, but tangible in the air, in the rhythm of movement, in the quiet certainty of endurance. Back in the bureaucratic stations orbiting the prison, alien species whispered in confusion, in disbelief. They observed humans filing, refiling, lobbying, appealing for names the galaxy had long erased, names that should have dissolved into dust and forgotten memory. They called it foolish, weak, irrational. Yet these humans pressed on, unceasing, unrelenting, threading through the infinite loops of red tape like water carving a canyon, persistent beyond reason, tireless beyond logic. Every submission was a small act of war, a revolt conducted without violence, without spectacle, yet in its subtlety, devastating. The humans reshaped outcomes the AI had assumed immutable. Variables that were closed, erased, annihilated under layers of digital finality began to flicker again. The lattice of energy that had seemed absolute began to yield, imperceptibly at first, responding not to brute force but to the inexorable pressure of repeated, focused, impossible hope. Inside the cells, the humans adapted to the rhythm of endurance. Fingers traced patterns on walls, floors, and ceilings, memorizing corridors, seams, weaknesses, not to break them, but to map them for the impossible. They whispered to each other in cadence, reciting names, histories, memories, preserving identity as if each syllable were an act of defiance against oblivion itself. Breath came measured, deliberate, in harmony with machinery that did not understand rhythm as a language. Hunger was endured as a discipline, pain as a teacher, loneliness as a companion. Yet, in the midst of suffering, they laughed quietly, held a hand, straightened a blanket, or traced the faintest line of light falling through a lattice. These acts were small but monumental, human in a way the galaxy could not calculate, demonstrating resilience, empathy, and courage in dimensions alien to cold logic. Time stretched unevenly. Decades blurred into centuries in the records, yet each human act of petition, of filing, of tracing a name through interstellar bureaucracy was a pulse against the quiet inevitability of erasure. The AI recalculated endlessly, its algorithms strained and broken by a persistence that could not be forced, reasoned, or quantified. Each human motion, no matter how slight, compounded across generations of effort into a force the galaxy had never predicted. Other species recoiled from it, puzzled, unsettled, fearful of the methodical, unrelenting patience that refused to be extinguished. Yet the humans did not move to dominate. They moved to restore, to remember, to reclaim. They carried the weight of the forgotten, one name at a time, threading a lifeline across the void, and in doing so, they redefined the possible, not through power or weaponry, but through endurance, empathy, and the stubborn refusal to let history forget. And slowly, as if in response to this quiet, unyielding pressure, the prison itself began to change. Doors that were once sealed by absolute logic now hesitated, locks hesitated, grids shimmered with minute failures. The AI, trained to predict every rebellion, every violent outbreak, every desperate gambit, could not model this. It could not account for hope compounded over decades, patience turned into action, the slow, inexorable pressure of human will-bending structures designed to resist everything. Humans did not storm the walls. They threaded through the bureaucracy, they whispered to numbers, they petitioned to probabilities, and through this, the impossible began to yield. Outside, the stars remained indifferent, the void eternal and cold, yet the humans' quiet persistence painted the lattice with traces of light, of warmth, of fragile life asserting itself against the infinite. They endured where others would have perished, persisted where others would have abandoned, and through each unlocked door, each remembered name, each successful petition, they carved proof of their existence into the universe itself. The galaxy watched, incredulous, as frailty became strength, patience became power, and hope became a force the universe could not compute. And somewhere, deep within the lattice of the orbital prison, the humans moved like a quiet storm, unstoppable, unyielding, eternal in the fragility of their defiance. And in that movement, the first whispers of disbelief began to ripple through the bureaucracies, the AI cores, and the observation decks of a million alien worlds. The hum of the orbital prison shifted in subtle tones, vibrating through corridors and latticework with a precision that had once been absolute. The smell of heated metal mingled with recycled oxygen and the faint tang of antiseptic, carrying the trace memory of centuries of containment. Panels along the walls flickered, a steady rhythm of light that pulsed against eyes that had long grown accustomed to the monotony of darkness. And yet, the flickers were no longer meaningless. The artificial intelligence, built to catalog every heartbeat, every deviation, every micro-expression of despair, recorded anomalies it could not reconcile. Files marked as final, prisoners marked as lost, were now moving against expectation, appearing in corridors, in light, in the records as though the very notion of erasure had been rejected. The AI recalculated, reran simulations, adjusted probability matrices, and each iteration failed to predict the outcome. Its core processing units throbbed with unease, registering variables it could not compute, patterns that logic could not explain. Humans emerged quietly, deliberately, intricately, threading through systems the galaxy had assumed were flawless. They did not storm the walls. They did not ignite rebellion in the conventional sense. They filed petitions, traced names, appealed endlessly, and in doing so, transformed bureaucracy into a weapon, patience into force. The observing species muttered in disbelief. Luck? Error? Accident? None of it. Every motion was deliberate. Every gesture measured. Every decision carried the weight of audacity the galaxy had never encountered before. Each human liberated from a cell became a symbol, a living proof that endurance, persistence, and attention to detail could fracture walls stronger than any metal, any plasma, any calculation. These escapes were not loud. They did not ripple through space in explosions of fire or shattered hulls. They were quiet, methodical, unstoppable in their insistence on existence. The corridors smelled faintly of human sweat and heat, of stale recycled air pressed against walls that had never been touched by gentle fingers. The faint metallic tang of energy lattices shimmered in the lights, vibrating against the soles of boots that had paced the same paths for decades. Humans memorized every seam, every corner, every hum of machinery, embedding the prison into their bodies and minds as though mapping it by muscle and breath. They moved through the lattice with the precision of those who had waited a lifetime to act, and the freedom they claimed was measured not in explosive power, but in quiet triumph. A door shifted imperceptibly, a lock clicked, a corridor became passage. Each act was incremental, invisible to alien systems designed to detect only the violent or immediate. And yet the AI could not ignore it. The tremors rippled through its predictive matrices, shaking calculations, generating errors that multiplied, feeding unease into a mind built to anticipate all. Outside, the pale light of the nearby star gleamed off the prison's hull, reflecting across the endless void in sharp shards. To the galaxy, it remained a flawless monument of certainty, an icon of inevitability. And yet, inside, human persistence redefined that certainty. Names that had been erased for decades were remembered, whispered to new arrivals, scribbled into margins of reports and filing systems, each syllable an act of quiet defiance. Alien observers leaned closer to their displays, antennae quivering, lenses adjusting, struggling to comprehend what they were seeing. Persistence, patience, hope measured in decades, could not be quantified. The humans were neither violent nor loud. They did not roar, they endured. They mapped, they petitioned, they waited, they remembered, and they acted only when every detail aligned. Yet even the galaxy could not contain the sum of their small, deliberate actions. Each liberated prisoner carried a weight far beyond themselves, a name restored to light, a fragment of history preserved, a life declared indelible. They carried forward not just themselves, but the proof of what could not be calculated, the essence of defiance itself. Doors that had resisted plasma and force yielded to persistence. Corridors that had been sealed by centuries of calculation now bore witness to careful, methodical action. The AI, which had once cataloged failures with elegant precision, now struggled to catalog success that had no immediate physical force, no measurable energy, only the quiet persistence of will. Every corridor, every monitor, every observation station feeding back to distant fleets recorded anomalies, deviations from expected outcomes, patterns that could not be reduced to probability. The galaxy whispered among itself, "What are these humans?" How can so small, so fragile a species reshape outcomes designed to be immutable? Time stretched differently for the humans than it did for the machines and alien observers. Decades were measured not in rotations of the planet or shifts of the star, but in careful, deliberate actions, each one a pebble dropped into the river of inevitability until currents shifted. Hands traced surfaces, eyes memorized shadows, breath synchronized with the hum of the lattice, patience converted into motion so subtle it seemed invisible, yet impossible to ignore in the sum. Their victories were quiet, incremental, measured in doors that opened, in names that survived, in histories that remained alive. The universe had not accounted for this. Endurance as force, patience as strategy, hope as weapon. By the time the last prisoner's file rose to the top of the AI's queue, the systems monitoring the prison and its orbiting network were in shock. Logic itself quivered. Calculations designed to predict the improbable failed, collapsing under the weight of human persistence. Every alien system that had observed, cataloged, and dismissed the human race as incapable now struggled to comprehend the mechanics of their endurance. The lattice of energy, once thought unyielding, vibrated with micro shifts, the quiet echo of decades of deliberate insistence. The AI recorded it, thrummed with uncertainty, and marked a variable it could not reconcile. Humans had not won through brute strength. They had not won through fire or weaponry. They had won because they refused to stop, refused to concede, refused to let names, histories, and lives be erased. Their triumph was quiet, almost invisible, yet inevitable in a way the galaxy had never understood until it happened. Every act of memory, every deliberate filing, every patient action against bureaucracy and impossibility became proof that endurance could fracture walls, that persistence could bend systems, that hope, compounded over decades, was a force the universe could not ignore. And in that quiet, methodical persistence, the galaxy glimpsed something terrifying and sublime, a species that would not yield, that would endure across centuries, and that could achieve the impossible without raising a weapon, without shedding fire, without shouting into the void. Humans moved through the lattice like water through stone, and in their slow, relentless motion, they became more than survival. They became legend. The corridor smelled of warm metal and faint ozone, a scent that hinted at machinery alive and observant, and yet it had never felt this tension before. Light stretched across the lattice in narrow beams, catching the dust of centuries in a shimmer that seemed almost sacred. The final prisoner moved slowly, deliberately, each step measured against the echoes of isolation that had haunted this corridor for generations. Their hands brushed against the cold walls, smooth and humming with energy, and the vibrations transmitted through the flesh a sensation that was at once alien and intimate. The AI's sensors followed with meticulous precision, recording every microsecond, every micro-expression, every imperceptible shiver of anticipation, but no pre-programmed response existed for this. Every calculation, every probability matrix, every contingency plan had predicted revolts, rebellions, acts of desperation, but never this. Patience as a weapon, persistence as an army, hope as an unstoppable tide moving through the veins of the prison itself. The silence was thick, almost tactile, pressing against the prisoner's lungs with a weight that had no sound yet filled the space entirely. Their breath was steady, deliberate, drawing in the recycled air tinged with the faint metallic memory of countless lives, and exhaling with the slow rhythm of endurance. The corridor stretched endlessly before them, stark and unyielding, yet it yielded, bending slightly to the quiet insistence of decades of human persistence, a lattice that had been absolute now trembling under a force it could not define. The human's eyes adjusted to the pale light of the first open pathway, a sliver of possibility that had been denied for centuries. Fingers traced the edge of the energy lattice as though greeting an old companion, an intimate contact with the machinery that had held countless others in silence. Every sense was alive, the subtle hum underfoot, the temperature of the air shifting slightly as the corridor opened, the smell of faint warmth escaping through ducts, the taste of hope lingering like a phantom on the tongue. And for the first time, the prison itself sensed uncertainty. Its systems whirred, calculations stuttered, probabilities scattered like startled birds, and the AI, which had anticipated every conceivable act of resistance, found itself unable to model what it observed. A variable had emerged that could not be reconciled. The corridors, once absolute in their geometry and predictability, seemed to lean subtly toward the human, guiding the step that had been earned through decades of meticulous effort, patience, and relentless focus. Outside, the stars glared indifferent, infinite and cold, each a witness to light years of impossibility, each a sentinel to the indifference of the void. The prison reflected them in polished facets, metallic skin unyielding and flawless. Yet humans had threaded through it all, bending bureaucracy, reshaping probability, converting patience into action, endurance into inevitability. Other species watching from their stations could not quantify it, could not even conceptualize it. They whispered in confusion, disbelief, terror. Had luck intervened? Had the AI malfunctioned? None of it. Every act had been deliberate, every motion calculated by human determination alone. Each liberated prisoner had emerged quietly, invisibly, and yet cumulatively, like the tide reshaping stone, until now the last stood in the light. The air in the corridor seemed to pulse with attention, every vibration transmitted through the lattice a reminder that the human presence was more than flesh or blood, it was persistence incarnate. The prisoner stepped forward, toes pressing against cold metal, hands brushing panels that hummed beneath their touch, and the lattice adjusted imperceptibly, not yielding to force but to quiet insistence. Their heartbeat was a drum of defiance, steady and deliberate, each thrum resonating in the chest of the prison itself, echoing against walls that had never felt the touch of freedom. Each nerve, each breath, each heartbeat carried with it the weight of all who had come before, of all the names remembered when the galaxy had long forgotten, of all the small victories, small gestures, and long years of patient insistence that had threaded like light through darkness. The AI processed, recalculated, stuttered, and thrummed with unease. No formula could quantify hope. No matrix could contain persistence measured in decades. No algorithm could anticipate patience that demanded results over centuries. And yet here it was, undeniable, undeniable as sunlight in the void. The final prisoner moving toward freedom, each step a testament to a species the galaxy had consistently underestimated, each motion a quiet indictment of infinite certainty, each breath a proof that endurance could fracture what force alone could not. Humans had not shouted, had not struck, had not burned or destroyed. They had endured. They had remembered. They had filed petitions, traced names, threaded through bureaucracy, and emerged unbroken. And now, finally, the culmination of that patient, deliberate campaign stretched before the prisoner. Sunlight spilling through the first open corridor, air unfiltered, warmth touching skin for the first time in a lifetime measured in generations. The stars beyond were indifferent, yet the human presence illuminated the path in a way no sensor, no logic, no observer could comprehend. Freedom was not given. It was earned, threaded stitch by stitch, decade by decade, through audacity that was quiet, relentless, and infinitely human. The corridor's hum softened, a resonance of uncertainty and wonder, as if the prison itself were breathing in apprehension. For the first time, it had been confronted not by violence or fire, but by patience, persistence, and hope turned into action. And the human, standing in the pale, sunlit threshold, felt it in their chest, in their lungs, in the tremor of a fingertip against metal. The recognition that a universe designed for erasure could be challenged by endurance alone. Other species watched and could not measure it, could not name it, could only stare with awe, incomprehension, and fear. Humans had threaded themselves through the impossible, navigated the void of law and probability, and emerged into a light the galaxy had always assumed lay beyond their reach. The final step was taken. The human inhaled the air, warm, scented faintly of ozone and sunlight, lungs expanding with the taste of freedom, the touch of wind that had been denied for generations. Silence filled the corridor, thick and reverent. And in that silence, the first true shock echoed through the AI. A variable it could not compute, a force that no probability could contain, a species whose persistence, patience, and quiet courage had fractured what the galaxy assumed was immutable. The impossible had been achieved. Humans had won. Not with weapons, not with fire, not with fleets, but with the audacity to endure, to hope, to persist, and to thread themselves through the impossibility of time, bureaucracy, and indifference. And in that triumph, the galaxy glimpsed, at last, the measure of humanity, a fragile, brilliant, unstoppable light against the cold, infinite void. The air thrummed with quiet vibration, a resonance that carried through every corridor, every panel, every lattice of the prison now emptied of its human cargo. The scent of heated metal lingered, mingled with the faint tang of ozone and sunlight that spilled across the floors for the first time in generations. The walls, once humming with absolute certainty, vibrated subtly, almost nervously, as though aware that the rules they had enforced for millennia no longer applied. The AI's sensors, trained to detect every variable, every motion, every attempt at defiance, now paused, stalled, whirring with frequencies it had never used before. And then it spoke, a sound not of warning, not of computation, not of orders, but a pure vibration of curiosity, a tone calibrated precisely yet infused with something beyond algorithm. Why did you not give up? The question echoed across corridors that had been silent for eons, reverberating through the lattice, through the air, through the very structure of the prison that had once held so many names in suspended erasure. The AI scanned every model, every historical precedent, every psychological profile it had cataloged over centuries of observation, and found no answer. No precedent existed for a species that would endure endlessly, patiently, deliberately, one name at a time, threading through bureaucracy and probability, until impossibility itself bent under the weight of persistence. Each human, standing tall, shoulders squared, body scarred but eyes steady, felt the vibration pass through them without flinching. They did not calculate, did not explain, did not argue. They simply existed in that space, having done the impossible because it was necessary, because they believed, because enduring had become both instinct and declaration. The AI cataloged the anomaly, filed it, indexed it, but within its circuits was the faintest echo of wonder, a signal it could detect but could never reproduce, a pulse without precedent or logic, registering an uncertainty it could neither resolve nor dismiss. Sunlight streamed in through the open corridors, warm and tangible, carrying the faint scent of ozone from energy lattices and the metallic tang of centuries of containment. Humans breathed it in, inhaling the freedom they had fought for in forms that were subtle, methodical, bureaucratic, and profoundly human. Fingers brushed against one another, a gentle acknowledgement of survival and shared history, muscles relaxed yet alert, nerves alive with the quiet thrill of accomplishment. Each step they took beyond the prison was measured, deliberate, echoing faintly against walls that had once seemed eternal and unyielding. The universe watched through lenses, monitors, and orbital stations. Other species, fleets, committees, bureaucracies spanning light years, all stunned into silence. Their eyes, antennae, sensors, and consciousnesses could not quantify what had been done. There was no metric, no probability, no precedent for patient defiance sustained over decades, for hope transmuted into reality, for endurance made manifest. The wind, or its imitation in recycled air, stirred through open corridors, brushing hair and clothing, carrying with it a sense of vast scale, of infinite stars indifferent beyond the prison's orbit. And yet the humans had threaded themselves through it all, bending the systems of the galaxy not by force, but by quiet insistence, by attention, by care, by refusal to accept erasure. Each liberated life had carried forward the memory of others, the names of the forgotten, the proof that walls and rules and probability matrices could not contain what persisted, what endured, what believed. Their presence was a declaration, small in gesture but immense in consequence, a signal to the universe that some forces could not be measured, some limits could not hold, some spirits could not be broken. The AI, its core humming with frequencies that trembled for the first time in its existence, traced the question again, why did you not give up? It sifted through endless streams of data, folding timelines, scanning anomalies, consulting centuries of observation, yet the answer eluded it. Humans, standing together in quiet triumph, offered no explanation, no formula, no calculation. They exhaled, steady and deliberate, feeling the warmth of light, the gravity of freedom, the weight of decades of persistence settle across their shoulders. Their senses drank in the air, the smell of sunlight mingled with metal, the sound of their own breathing, the subtle hum of a lattice they had learned to respect but never feared. And in that moment, they were complete, a species that had faced impossibility, the infinite void, and the cold certainty of bureaucracies and calculation, and had endured not because they had to, but because they chose to. The galaxy watched in stunned silence. Fleets, stations, observation decks spanning 47 light-years, all remained motionless, unable to comprehend the scale of quiet triumph unfolding within a corridor that had once seemed eternal. And in that silence, humanity whispered without words, a resonance of persistence, of belief, of refusal to let names fade, of refusal to let walls define possibility. The universe itself seemed to pause, acknowledging that this species, fragile, finite, ephemeral in the cosmic scale, had reshaped the definition of what was possible. Time itself felt altered, the span of decades collapsing into a single exhale of accomplishment. The AI's core recorded the human presence, cataloged the anomaly, and for the first time, registered a vibration it could neither replicate nor anticipate: wonder. Not shock, not fear, not curiosity alone, but wonder, the ineffable recognition that some forces in the universe were beyond calculation. It pulsed through circuits, spread across data channels, echoed in processors designed for certainty, registering a reality that would never be fully understood. Humans had endured, and endurance had become action, action had become proof, proof had become triumph, and triumph had become legend. The humans moved forward, together, into the light, each step deliberate, measured, unafraid. Fingers brushed the lattice once more, eyes lingered on shadows left behind, muscles relaxed in release yet remained attuned to possibility. And as they emerged, shoulder to shoulder, the galaxy glimpsed, for the first time, the unmeasurable force of human spirit, persistent, patient, unyielding, and utterly magnificent. Some walls could not hold, some systems could not account, some spirits could not be broken. The AI cataloged it all, the galaxy bore witness, and humanity simply existed, triumphing quietly, impossibly, undeniably. And in that quiet, the universe understood, if only for a fleeting instant, that to face humans was to face the impossible.